One day in 331 BC, a great conqueror came to a desolate strip of land on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea and envisioned a great city being founded there. To the astonishment of his men, the conqueror dropped down to his knees and began drawing out a street grid on the ground using barley grains. No sooner had he finished his rudimentary map than a flock of birds descended and ate the grains, much to the consternation of the great man. But his friends told him not to worry, that this was a sign from the gods that his new city would be prosperous and feed many nations. So goes the founding legend of the city of Alexandria, which at one time was one of the world's greatest metropolises. From the time of its founding by Alexander the Great, the city has been the focus of great empires, fought over and molded into something the world had never seen before by great men and women. Few places have had more of an impact on world events than Alexandria, which served as a conduit through which people, goods, and ideas flowed from 3 continents. Over the more than 2,000 years since its founding, Alexandria has been many things. An economic powerhouse, a repository for all the world's knowledge, a melting pot of different cultures and religions, the gateway to Egypt, and a hotbed of revolutionary sentiment. Today, the modern city of Alexandria bears almost no resemblance to the ancient city of Alexander. The city has been knocked down and rebuilt countless times over the centuries by natural disasters, war, and the unstoppable march of progress, to the point that little remains of its old character. But that has been what Alexandria is from the very beginning, a place that suited the needs of its current inhabitants, not a museum dedicated to those who came before. To learn about what Alexandria used to be, therefore, we have only stories. Whether those stories are true or not, however, we'll leave you to decide. Welcome back to Geographics. I'm your host, Eric Malachite, and today's script was provided by Ben Edelman, so be sure to show him some love in the comments as you deploy your like, subscribe, and ring that bell, and share this video with someone who enjoys learning about the world's most famous locations. Let's get to it. Alexandria by Egypt, as the city was known in the early days, as Alexander founded anywhere between 12 and 20 other Alexandrias all throughout his new territory, at times leading to great confusion among historians, I'm sure you can imagine. It was located in a strategic position along the coastline. The city boasted naturally sheltered harbors thanks to the island of Pharos just off the mainland, and was sandwiched on a narrow strip of land between the sea and the freshwater lake Mareotis, which offered both a source of drinking water and natural fortifications to protect the city from attack. Ancient canals from the days of the pharaohs connected the city to the Nile River, which allowed for easy navigation and trade with the rest of Egypt, and by extension all of Asia and Africa, while the seaport connected it to Europe. Alexander the Great never saw the great city he had founded, not while he was alive anyway. Soon after the incident with the birds and the barley grains, the Macedonian king left Egypt, never to return, as he headed towards his great showdown with Persian king Darius at Gaugamela, and then continued his conquest all the way to India before dying in Babylon in 323 BC. Without a universally recognized heir to the throne, the new empire Alexander had created quickly went to pieces following his death, torn apart by his generals who each wanted to carve out a niche of their own. Perhaps none of these Diadochi, or successors, was more shrewd than one of Alexander's closest friends and advisors, Ptolemy, who had already set his sights on Egypt as his little corner of Alexander's conquests to claim. And he didn't plan to go by himself either. In a wild turn of events, Ptolemy orchestrated the hijacking of Alexander's funeral cortege, while it was making its slow trip from Babylon to the Macedonian capital, Pella, and spirited the king's body off to Alexandria instead. Now, that guy has some balls. Had some balls. Past tense. Having Alexander's body buried in an elaborate tomb in the city he founded gave Alexandria and Ptolemy a legitimacy they might have lacked otherwise. The Macedonian general crowned himself pharaoh of Egypt in 305 BC and made Alexandria the country's new capital, having spent the previous 2 decades fending off challenges from other successors. He'd also spend that time, as well as vast sums of money, building up Alexandria into one of the world's foremost cities. Ptolemy was considered a good soldier, but an excellent administrator. The Ptolemaic Empire that he created would be a merger between Greek and Egyptian cultures and beliefs centered around a newly created hybrid god called Serapis. By the time he died in 282 BC, he was already being called Ptolemy Soter, meaning Ptolemy the Savior, because he was considered by many Egyptians to have saved them from the chaos of the succession wars and made them a great and prosperous country again. I want to take a moment to talk about today's sponsor, italki. One thing that's really important to me when showcasing a product that involves education is that it allows for more than one type of learning style. As someone who learns best through both absorbing information and through application, italki may just be the ultimate language learning app. So this is actually our second time partnering with italki, and that's because we genuinely found it helpful the first time around. And let me tell you, if you've tried other language learning apps, this one blows them all out of the water. I've tried to learn a few languages in my day, and unfortunately my busy work schedule always makes it difficult for me to commit to learning a second language. So I almost never get more than a cursory understanding of said language. But incredibly, italki will work with your schedule.
So Spanish does have two genders, masculine and feminine.
Okay.
Very different from English.
Yes.
On the right side of the page, we can see las despedidas. So that would be feminine example.
Okay.
So you can notice the OS and AS. Los, las. Those are the definite articles, so that's just like do in English.
Mm-hmm.
And then the genders. That's unlike English.
Right.
Okay, how would you pronounce the first word?
Hola.
Hola. Yeah, we don't say the letter H.
No.
We don't pronounce initial letter H.
italki is fantastic because it uses personalized one-on-one sessions with native speaking teachers, and this really allows students to improve their ability to listen and speak a secondary language of their choice with confidence. And as someone who does a lot of pronunciation research, sometimes the computer voices just don't cut the mustard when you're trying to learn a new pronunciation or word. You'll also get real-time feedback and guidance in your quest towards fluency. And if your schedule is stacked, well, italki has many payment options available so you can customize your language learning journey to your unique schedule and budget. So if you're crazy busy like me, you can even pay per lesson. And italki features AI learning tools, so you can take your language learning journey to the next level. So really, what you've got is options that are accommodating to many other learning styles. So what are you waiting for? Click through the link below in the description to start your language learning journey. Buy $10, get $5 free for your first lesson using my exclusive promo code GeoGraphics5. The discounts are only available for the first 50 users. Now back. Alexandria's prosperity only increased under the reigns of Ptolemy's sons and grandsons, who were also called Ptolemy. In fact, all the male rulers of the Ptolemaic Empire were named Ptolemy, or at the very least changed their name to Ptolemy when they took the throne. Less than a century after its founding, Alexandria was already one of the world's largest cities. For a while, it was the largest. Then after that, was second only to Rome for centuries afterwards. The secret to its success was its unmatched economic power. It was the world's busiest trading port, with goods in transit from all corners of the known world. Greek pottery could be shipped to Alexandria, then transported via canal to the Nile, from there to the Red Sea and on to Arabia and India. All the while, goods were coming the other way. Meanwhile, Egypt had massive profits from exports of its own, particularly wheat. Rome alone was buying 150,000 tons a year of Egyptian wheat, almost all of which was shipped there via Alexandria. The Ptolemies used their massive wealth to finance huge construction projects that served a practical utilitarian purpose while also projecting their power to both the people of Egypt and to anyone who visited. There was the Heptastadion, a giant earthen causeway that connected the island of Pharos to the mainland and split the harbor into two sheltered ports. Out on Pharos was constructed the first purpose-built lighthouse in the world, the Great Pharos of Alexandria, named one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The massive Serapeum was one of the ancient world's most elaborate temples, made of marble and precious metals. But no building was more important to either Alexandria or the world than the Great Library, known in ancient Greek as the Biblion, or Shrine of Books. Here, the librarians sought to gather all the world's knowledge into one place by gathering every book ever written. This vast storehouse of knowledge attracted great scholars from all across the known world, where they gathered in the neighboring Mauseon or Shrine of Muses to trade ideas and conduct experiments. A massive array of scientific advancements in a wide variety of fields was made there, including the works of Euclid, the father of geometry, and Eratosthenes, who not only was one of the first people to posit that the Earth was round, not flat, but also managed to calculate the planet's circumference with an astonishing level of accuracy. The librarians not only collected books, which were actually scrolls in those days, they also translated them into the Alexandrian dialect of Greek, giving Western scholars access to texts written in Eastern languages, the most important of which, perhaps, was the Hebrew Bible. However, even as Alexandria grew in importance, the Ptolemaic Empire it was the capital of began to fall apart. The cause was internal, almost continual dynastic infighting and civil war between a succession of rulers who each seemed less competent than the last. At least part of the problem was that the Ptolemies had adopted the bizarre custom of marrying their own sisters. The children of these incestuous unions showed a marked level of mental instability, as so often happens in these cases. By the 1st century BC, the kingdom was in deep debt to the Roman Republic, the rising power in the West, and eventually the Romans came to collect. Julius Caesar originally came to Alexandria in 48 BC seeking his great rival, Pompey Magnus, who he'd recently defeated in the Roman Civil War. The advisors of King Ptolemy XIII, who was only 13 years old, sought to curry favor with Caesar by having Pompey murdered as soon as he stepped ashore in Egypt. It didn't work. Not only was Caesar not happy to be presented with Pompey's severed head, he instead demanded immediate repayment of the more than 10 million denarii that the kingdom owed the Roman Senate. Caesar also inserted himself into the dynastic dispute between Ptolemy and his sister wife Cleopatra, who were supposed to be ruling Egypt together but instead were each plotting to remove the other. Cleopatra, who had been exiled by her brother, saw her chance to return to power with Caesar's arrival, and managed to sneak into the royal quarter where Caesar and his army were staying. The Roman general became infatuated with the Egyptian queen, and the two quickly became lovers. Caesar's stated intention to put Cleopatra back on the throne beside Ptolemy, while both of them would rule under the guardianship of Rome, enraged Ptolemy and his advisors, who summoned an army to oust the Romans from the royal palace in Alexandria. The siege of Alexandria was certainly bizarre. A Ptolemaic army besieging their own capital city, which was being held by a small force of foreign soldiers. The battle was fierce, but Caesar eventually emerged triumphant when reinforcements arrived. The teenage Ptolemy drowned during the retreat from Alexandria, leaving Cleopatra and Caesar as sole rulers of Egypt. Cleopatra continued her affair with Caesar, resulting in the birth of a son, Caesarion, who Cleopatra immediately began to groom as both her successor in Egypt and as his father's successor in Rome. This all came to a screeching halt in 44 BC when Julius Caesar was assassinated in Rome, and in the chaos that followed, Cleopatra allied herself with Mark Antony, one of Caesar's lieutenants and part of the second triumvirate that split control of the Roman territories. Antony and Cleopatra now became lovers, resulting in 3 more children, and Antony himself grew increasingly dependent on Cleopatra for money and troops as he engaged in various military campaigns in the east. All the while, Cleopatra was rebuilding Alexandria's fortunes. Fondly remembered in Egypt as a talented ruler and potent symbol of Egyptian national pride, a far cry from the common Western portrayal of her as a seductress who beguiled powerful men like Caesar and Antony into her bed and onto her side. However, a great showdown was building between Antony and Octavian, Caesar's grandnephew, who had taken power in Rome itself. Civil war came again in 32 BC, with Octavian facing off against Antony and Cleopatra. The decisive naval battle of Actium saw the two lovers decisively defeated, and Octavian followed them back to Alexandria, which he laid siege to. Both Antony and Cleopatra committed suicide rather than be captured and humiliated by Octavian, marking the end of the Ptolemaic dynasty. From now on, Alexandria and Egypt would be a Roman province. But just as Rome changed Alexandria, Alexandria also changed Rome too. With the capture of the city and the elimination of his great rival, Octavian completed his transition to Caesar Augustus, marking the end of the Republic and the beginning of the Roman Empire. Initially under the Romans, Alexandria returned to prosperity, serving as the empire's second city. It was still invaluable to the emperors as a grain depot to feed the residents of the Italian peninsula, and was as prosperous of a trade port as it ever was. However, the relationship between the two cities was not always a harmonious one. In 215 AD, the emperor Caracalla came to visit Alexandria, and in response to a popular satire making fun of him that was making the rounds in the city, massacred as many as 20,000 of the inhabitants. I guess dictators just don't have a sense of humor. Alexandria was one of the first large cities visited by Christian missionaries in the 1st century AD, particularly St. Mark the Evangelist, who is credited with founding the Church of Alexandria in 49 AD and becoming the city's first bishop. He died there in 68 AD and was buried in the city. His corpse was later involved in one of the most bizarre episodes of the Middle Ages in the 9th century, when 2 Venetian merchants stole the body of the saint from his Alexandrian tomb and spirited it to Venice, where it was reinterred in a new basilica, though apparently without his head, which somehow was left in Egypt. As Christianity gained more and more converts, they were routinely persecuted in Alexandria just as they were in other Roman cities. Then, when the empire officially converted to Christianity, it was the turn of the pagans to be persecuted, with their temples torn down and converted to churches. And all sides went after the city's Jewish residents, who had built a thriving community there since the earliest days of the city. Then, in 641 AD, the city was captured by the followers of the prophet Muhammad, and a new faith came to Alexandria: Islam. By that time, the Roman Empire had collapsed, replaced in the east by the Byzantine Empire of Constantinople, who were unable to prevent the Arab conquest of Egypt, the Levant, and then Asia Minor. Egypt's new rulers made the decision to move the capital from Alexandria further inland, eventually settling on Cairo, where it remains today. It was the beginning of a sustained period of decline in both importance and prosperity, as trade began to move to different ports, the seat of government departed, and people began moving away. The old architecture was disappearing. The Great Lighthouse was destroyed by a series of earthquakes, the last of which, in 323, left it a pile of ruined rubble. The library had likely disappeared during the Roman period, destroyed during one of the many sieges the city suffered during the centuries of turmoil as the empire came apart. Even the Heptastadion disappeared. Centuries of accumulated silt had expanded it to the point that it now formed a full-fledged peninsula, permanently connecting the former island of Pharos to the mainland. As for the once fabulous tomb of Alexander, all accounts of it cease following the 3rd century AD, and what happened to it remains one of history's greatest mysteries. By the end of the 18th century, Alexandria looked nothing like the city of Alexander, Ptolemy, or Cleopatra. Not only were the old buildings gone, but even the city's geography had changed, with the majority of residences and businesses now located on the Menshia Isthmus, which had formed around the Heptastadion. The Ottomans and Mamluks that now ruled Egypt weren't that interested in the old city, since the city of Rosetta to the east was a far more important trading port. But thousands of kilometers away in Paris, someone was interested in Alexandria. Napoleon Bonaparte was getting ready to lead a grand expedition to Egypt, hoping to use it as a launching point to disrupt Great Britain's trade with India, and also to emulate one of his great heroes, Alexander the Great. It seemed obvious to him that the starting point for his invasion would be the great port city that Alexander had founded. The French invasion of Egypt was ultimately unsuccessful thanks to a combination of heat, disease, and British intervention, and Napoleon eventually abandoned his army to return to France, taking power as emperor and becoming a military legend in his own right. But the invasion did open the door to increased European interest in Alexandria and Egypt, much to the detriment of the inhabitants. The British bombarded the city in 1882 as part of their own invasion of Egypt, causing considerable damage. The country's affairs would be dominated by foreigners for decades afterwards, and Alexandria became the most popular place for Europeans in the country since they considered it to be more cultured and fashionable than Cairo. In the aftermath of World War II, during which Alexandria was targeted by German and Italian bombers causing considerable damage, there was growing levels of discontent throughout Egypt. Formal British occupation had ended in 1922 with the establishment of the Kingdom of Egypt, but King Farouk was seen as a largely ineffective puppet of European business interests, more concerned with funding his lavish playboy lifestyle than actually governing the country effectively. Things finally came to a head in 1952 when a military coup led by Gamal Abdel Nasser overthrew the monarchy, meaning that, for the first time since before the days of Alexander the Great, a native Egyptian was actually ruling over Egypt. And not just native to anywhere in Egypt either. Nasser was born in the Bakos neighborhood of Alexandria. Very little remains today of ancient Alexandria. Much of it is underwater today or is buried under the modern skyscrapers of the present city. The site of the old lighthouse is today the site of the historic Cape-based citadel, built in the 15th century by the Mamluks to protect the city's harbor. There is a new Great Library of Alexandria, built near where the old one once stood. It still has the lofty ambition to preserve the world's knowledge, but does so through a distinctly modern form. It makes digital copies of every single web page on the internet. So it's basically the Internet Archive. One of the few relics still standing is the so-called Pompey's Pillar, a 30-meter tall triumphal column built during the Imperial Roman period. Despite the name, it has nothing to do with Pompeii. The name came from a mistranslation of the column's text by European visitors. The city's demographics today also bear little resemblance to the multicultural melting pot of generations past. A growing wave of Arab and Egyptian nationalism in the wake of the 1952 revolution caused almost everyone who wasn't Arab to leave the city and the country for good, including the once large Jewish community, but also including Armenians, Turks, and people of European descent who had lived in Alexandria all their lives. The modern city is also huge. At least 5 million people live in the city proper, with millions more in the greater metropolitan area. That being said, when one visits the city of Alexandria today, you can feel the history of the place, even if the physical reminders of it are gone. The street grid in many places is virtually unchanged from when it was first laid down by Alexander, and reminders of the city's past are everywhere, from the overabundance of stray cats, ancient Egyptians considered them sacred, and to kill one was a capital offense, to the fact that it is one of the few places in Egypt where you can still find Christian cathedrals and Jewish synagogues alongside Islamic mosques, even if relatively few people today still use them. The most fascinating part about Alexandria is that it has been in an almost constant state of change since it was founded. The city has been built up, knocked down, and built up again countless times over the centuries, thanks to war, natural disasters, and the simple passage of time. Through it all, the city founded by the Macedonian king has endured, and likely will continue to do so in future centuries, even in the face of adversities such as climate change, aging municipal infrastructure, and overcrowding. The city may have changed, but it is still there, an enduring monument to all those who helped build Alexandria into the great metropolis it is today. I hope you learned something today, and if you enjoyed today's video, be sure to deploy your likes, comment a historical place we haven't covered yet, subscribe, and ring that bell, and share this video with someone who enjoys learning about history's most famous places. I'm Eric Malachite, and we'll see you next time.